I feel very, very grateful to be here today. It's just wonderful to be in such a wonderful group of people thinking about these really important issues. So I'm glad to be here kind of as a maker. And obviously, thank you to Sandra, Kat, Miriam, and Sarah for having me here. So why am I here? I'm going to talk a little bit, again, as a maker, and tell a couple of kind of cautionary tales, maybe talk a little bit about the die of the update or die scenario. So as Sandra said, I am a documentary filmmaker and interactive producer. My most recent work, Do Not Track, is a web documentary about privacy, which I made with UPN, Arte, Radio-Canada, and the Office National du Film. And I also work at the Mozilla Foundation as a commissioning editor for interactive media. So as you can tell, all the work I make lives on and is mostly about the World Wide Web. And so while I make things on the web, I've lost things on the web. And losing these things has taught me lessons that have guided my approach to how I make in the future. So the web is basically designed to lose stuff. And we've talked a lot today about its sort of decentralized nature. As far as networks go, it resembles more those ones on the right, being a trend towards being decentralized and distributed to centralized on the left. It doesn't have a central node that all other nodes of the web connect to. Any web page can connect to any other web page. And in fact, this decentralized nature is kind of its killer feature, right? Before the web, there were other attempts at information systems, and some of you might remember commercial services like this one, which is CompuServe. There were others, Prodigy, where you paid a fee to connect.
Please use this one.
Sure. You paid a fee to connect to that central service, and you could enjoy whatever CompuServe would have on offer for you. But the web quickly overtook these services, these centralized services, because everyone just kept adding more content. They could never compete with somebody creating their own encyclopedia that anyone could add anything to. You didn't need anyone's permission to add to the web. So rather than one server, like in the case of CompuServe, on the web you have infinite servers, right, that need to make a relationship with each of you, the client. So each time you visit a website, something like this is happening on that website. There's a little negotiation going on behind the scenes between the server and the client, and they send responses back and forth to one another. And each of those responses has a numbered code. So you, as the client, you might say like, hey, do you have that article? And then the server would say, let me check. Most of the time they would say, yes, I have that article. Here it is, which is code 200. But sometimes there's an error, and you might have seen some of these in your browser. So 403 forbidden means like maybe you don't have the password to get that content, or 408 means that it took too long for the server to get what you were asking for, and so it just gives up. Or 415 might mean it's an unsupported media type, so that server can't play those weird Doom movies that Kevin was talking about. So these are some of the types of errors that you can see. But almost all of you have seen this one, right? Who has not seen the 404 error? Right? It means page not found. And that's the most common error. It's because of that decentralized nature, right? Somebody put up a website, but it's not there anymore. It no longer exists. So the decentralized nature is kind of the web's killer feature, but it's also its curse from an archival perspective. Oh yeah, there's the GIF of, it's the weirdest 404 page on the internet. So we're probably less familiar with this error code, the 410 error, because almost no one uses it. And I really hadn't thought about this 410 very much until I read this blog post. It was about a guy named Mark Pilgrim who had committed info suicide. Mark was a really well-known in developer circles. He wrote a lot of blogs and published books about how to write JavaScript. And one day, he just had enough. He wrote, it's time for me to find a new hobby, preferably one that doesn't involve angle brackets or computers or electricity. And so he took all of his work off the internet. And a lot of people were concerned. It was kind of this event online, people trying to track him down. And he was a really prolific and well-respected person. But then they noticed that it wasn't that it was not found, it had been removed, complete with instructions to the server to give the code 410. You can see that in the developer tools over there. 410 is a unique error code that means gone. So in other words, it's intentional and permanent. No one really knows why he did it. He's still offline, you can't find him, but people sort of dug around and found this quote from him, where he says, embracing HTTP error code 410 means embracing the impermanence of all things. It's a bit of a philosophical departure from the internet. So as creators, and particularly in this room and today, we often think about how to preserve things forever, till after we are gone. But my experience actually is a bit the opposite, that smart archiving is often about how to properly let something die. So that's the error codes, and so I'm gonna start with the tale of 404. So in the early 2000s, I worked here in Montreal at a documentary production company called I Steal Film. Many of you are probably familiar with it. The company is really concerned with ideas of social justice, and in particular, the continuum of how to involve documentary subjects in their own representation. The founder, Dan Cross, had made several films about homelessness and was looking for ways to move representation away from him and further towards the audience, which he was doing by successfully giving the camera to his subjects, famously by a young street punk named Roach in the Squeegee Punks in Traffic. And so Dan proposed the idea of an archive of homeless people all across Canada, a way to document all these voices. And he wanted to do it on the web, but he'd never made anything for the web before. And so we started working together. So this is the website that we made in 2003 in Flash. It still works on my computer, but you can't find it anywhere else. And it started in a bit of a, I don't want to say dark place, but a somber place. It was essentially a memorial for all the lives that were disappearing through the course of Dan's filmmaking. And so basically he wanted to give an entry on this archive for everyone that he'd come across and the interviews that he'd made. But then we started to think, how could this be vibrant? So rather than a passive record, what if we could build a community? What if we could take ourselves out of the equation a little bit? So around 2003, we launched a members-based social media site that we renamed Homeless Nation. And thanks to the Office National du Film and other federal agencies for sponsoring it, you know, NFB was doing cool things even before Monique was around. And so we built this in Drupal, basically ourselves. And with some federal grant dollars, we hired outreach workers in Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, and Victoria. And they sat with people that they made, both teaching how to get on the internet, but also the first sort of part of the process was recording an initial video testimonial. So fingers crossed that this video works.
Welcome to Homeless Nation.
Oh, it should have sound though.
The world's first website made by and for the street community.
I'm coming from the Homeless Nation.
Turn it up here.
Homeless Nation.
I'm the outreach worker for Homeless Nation.
Squee here with Homeless Nation.
Homeless Nation in Victoria.
The Saturday night special Homeless Nation talk show.
With 5,000 registered members and hundreds of thousands of visitors every year, Homeless Nation is widely respected and stretches across Canada.
Bienvenue à Montréal, dans la jungle de Montréal, le squat à Fredos. Ce qui me fait chier, c'est qu'il faut se cacher. Man. Parce que si tu te caches pas, ben, first, le monde va te voir, donc les journalistes vont finir par arriver ici, puis ces assis-là vont finir par dévoiler où est-ce que t'es. Après leur passage, le 3/4 du temps, mais c'est la police qui vient mettre la clé dans la porte.
Oh my God. Here, get a shot. Check that out. Boom. How easy is that? What a shame. Look at all that.
So none of these voices really existed on the internet at that time. So I'm just going to show one little video, what it looked like kind of behind the scenes of making the site.
We learned how to use computers, important media skills, about harm reduction, and peer support.
Je vois le vidéo. Fait que, tu sais, il y a...
OK, je peux-tu laisser un commentaire? Ils vont le voir, du coup.
Félicitations, hein, tout. Sur la vidéo, là, tu viens d'envoyer un commentaire sur une vidéo. Mais quelqu'un qui voit ton commentaire peut te répondre à ton commentaire sur cette vidéo-là. Tu sais, si tu veux écrire des ressources ou des affaires comme ça, si tu veux mettre ça sur le site, tu peux le faire.
Ça me donne des outils, là. Ça veut dire quoi en français? Home, maison?
Homeless, c'est sans-abri. Tu y penses?
Ça veut dire sans-abri?
Ouais. La nation des sans-abri.
I left Montreal. I stopped squeegeeing. I got off the street. I quit heroin.
For all of you who know me as Tito, that guy is dead. My name is Terrence Sim, and here is the place where I'm at. It's called Harbor Lake Treatment Center, and 26th of November is my quit date of drugs.
Hey, I'm Nova. I guess I'm here to talk about suicide. I had a brother of mine commit suicide. It's just so hard. Like, being like a close friend of somebody like that just killed himself. I got through suicide. It took a long time, but I did. Sometimes, yeah, suicide is an option, but it's not the right option. There's always a way to deal with it.
I just want to say.
And so one of our challenges on a site like this was just hosting the videos. Particularly in the early 2000s, it was so expensive to do this. And for us, just as a very small team that was building the site itself, and keeping track of all the formats and compression was way too much for our outreach teams to tackle. Particularly in 2003, 2004, video was actually kind of rare to be able to find on the web. And so I was involved with a community of very early video bloggers, as we called ourselves, and many of us gravitated to an early startup called Blip TV. And they were a nice, scrappy startup. We could talk to them, we knew them, and because they were inspired by what we were doing, they made an offer to us that we could have access to their professional services for free and use their API, which is an application programming interface, to have Homeless Nation automatically upload to their servers to host the video. Awesome. We could get back to doing our work. So years passed, Homeless Nation changed a lot of people's lives, and a lot of sort of moving stories like you just saw were told. And we peaked at about 5,000 registered users. And then this happened. The world changed. Part of the Homeless Nation project was bringing the internet into places like homeless shelters and squats. And when smartphones and Wi-Fi became really ubiquitous, suddenly the connectivity issues, at least in North America, where we were working, were less about the scarcity of the connectivity and the hardware. And of course, when Facebook became mainstream, that really made social networking accessible to everyone. Some of you may remember that moment when suddenly everyone you knew was on Facebook. Well, that happened with homeless people too. So it turned out that our project was actually hyper relevant in the early 2000s and became less urgent as time went on. And in retrospect, this could have been a moment for us to think about whether the project was done. But we were busy, we were cash-strapped, kind of hustling doc filmmakers, and what we did instead was raise kids, get jobs, teach at universities, and make more documentaries, and the site continued, basically without our help, that community continued. Meanwhile, in some inbox that none of us actually were checking, we got these emails announcing that blip.tv had been sold. And they gave us a couple of months to get our videos off of the site, after which time everything would be deleted. But none of us actually knew this was happening. It was being sold to Maker Studios, which are the force behind YouTube celebrities like this guy, PewDiePie, who has 50 million subscribers to his weird show about video games. Kevin probably knows exactly who this person is. And so one day we started getting messages in the inboxes that we did check, that none of the videos could be found. They had disappeared. It was a pretty sick feeling in your stomach to get those emails. Not only something that you'd worked on for years, but more importantly, it was those voices that you saw earlier. Those voices just felt lost forever. And a lot of those people were no longer around. And as documentarians, it was crushing that these life stories had simply vanished. Now, luckily, I had a friend who worked at the Internet Archive, and I'd heard that they had some employees there who had created their own kind of activist archival team, and they call themselves rogue archivists, and they help rescue user data when websites go belly up. They kind of go in there and they suck up all the data. And it turns out that before Blip TV deleted their data, this team had downloaded all of the video files they could find before the plug was pulled. And after some back and forth, we're able to create a website for us, an archive of our archive where all these voices can be found today. And I do believe that they'll be there forever because the archive is an institution and a really important one. And that's why my first lesson is to give to them annually during their fundraising campaign. The second lesson I learned is really to partner wisely. While free was music to our ears, it wasn't smart to trust Blip TV with such an essential part of our project. This was a startup whose primary goal was to be sold. right? So we should have investigated that and had a plan B in place. And finally, I've learned that as important as the plan to raise the money and make the thing is, the next most important producing question is to how to properly end of life this work. And so I was really happy to hear William's suggestion that when these things are being funded, what would it look like to have a little bit of money set aside for that? Just a quick coda on that story. A year after they deleted all of our videos, Maker Studios was bought by the Walt Disney Corporation, who laid off 80 people. So big double birds to Maker Studios, wherever you are. So now is a tale of 410. So after Homeless Nation, one of the things I became really obsessed with was collaborative filmmaking, pushing the power of that representation even beyond the subject to the audience. And so we at I Steal Film made a website called Open Source Cinema to explore these concepts. We used it to produce my first feature film, RIP, A Remix Manifesto, and a big thanks to Mr. Prellinger for all the archives that we used to make that film. We thought that other filmmakers could benefit from this approach and started to offer the site as a paid service. Sadly, this one died too, and we ran out of money because, and this is important, we had licensed a very key part of our technology rather than building it ourselves. The economics just didn't make sense. But there was something interesting about exploring how video on the web could be mixed with the creations of other users. So I was invited to join Mozilla Foundation, where I created a JavaScript framework called Popcorn.js. And you can see, this is the first demo we made, and you can see that as the video is playing, elements of the page change as it progresses. So we had this idea that what if the information in the video could affect the rest of the page? So they just started talking about something else, so the Twitter feed changes, and the map changes, and the Wikipedia article changes. Kind of like the video is like a conductor of the page. And so we took this framework and we workshopped it with other filmmakers, and it became kind of a go-to framework for people who wanted to experiment with making their filmmaking interactive, particularly doc filmmakers. I'm going to show a little quick video of a workshop that we did where we invited those filmmakers to work on the framework with us and kind of come up with some approaches to interactive film.
Because I think that people have done, you know, like, let's make a film in a day, you know, and then be able to, like, show it, or let's collectively make a group film, you know. They do that at festivals all the time. But to partner with technology to do something on the web has been totally different.
You know, when you're a filmmaker, you want to put people in a theater, lock the door, and make them watch your movie from start to finish without any distractions. And so this idea of then, okay, how do you take your movie or take some portion of your movie and have it work in a different way, which is all about sort of interrupting that flow, basically, on some level, and have that be satisfying. It's a really, you know, it's a tough one. It's just great that we were able to come here and have 2 days to like, hack it out.
You'll get to a certain point in the video in which you'll be prompted.
So a life goal to get Steve James to say hack. But why I wanted to show that was essentially we had created a community around a piece of software that multiple people were contributing to, and they could based on the license and the sort of philosophy behind the project. But ultimately what we wanted to do was level the playing field so that anyone could make work like this. And so we created this tool called Popcorn Maker. So you can see here it has a standard timeline, which you might recognize from your editing, but it also let you add other elements of the web to the frame as well. So you could add those Twitter feeds or an image or another type of pop-up. Educators loved it, the press loved it, we loved making it, but then the world sort of changed again. And for us, this was the Snowden revelations in 2013, and it really changed the focus of our work at the Mozilla Foundation. And an increasing amount of our resources are now directed to helping users understand the threats to a healthy internet and supporting a larger network of like-minded organizations doing the same thing. And Popcorn was actually really challenging to make. It was this machine for stitching together parts of the internet, but what we'd find was that all these services were constantly changing. So Twitter, Flickr, YouTube, Vimeo, Google Maps, we all had included those services, and they all changed their APIs constantly and changed what they were willing to give us for free. Shit happens, foundations change their priorities, startups become empires, and in the world of software, unless you have millions of users who are paying or that someone else is willing to monetize, it's a hard go. So we had to suspend development on Popcorn Maker and had to let our community know that it would be taken offline. So we pulled a 410, and this is the notice that you get when you try to access Popcorn Maker. But the story doesn't end there. Something I've mentioned before, haven't mentioned, is that all the code for Popcorn and Popcorn Maker is free and open source software. The software was written itself by more than 50 people, most of them who are not Mozilla staff. And it's been forked more than 600 times, meaning that people have made their own versions of it. It's completely free to use and modify. No one has to ask for permission, and no one owes any royalties to us or has to pay any fees, which is what killed my first attempts with open source cinema. So my friend Tracy, the same person who introduced me to the archive team, went and copied all of our code and rehosted Popcorn Maker on the Internet Archive. And this is a screenshot of Popcorn Maker today, live. You can go there now. It's resurrected and fully functioning. And it's used as a media literacy resources in their here's an example of it on their Trump Archives project. You can use Popcorn Maker today to remix anything on the Internet Archive's 4.7 million strong archive of moving images. Hopefully some kid is mashing up Trump right now. So if you'd come to me when I started open source cinema 10 years ago and said that any clip on the Internet Archive could be remixed with any other clip, I would have been overjoyed. The Internet Archive is the natural home for this project, but it actually took us telling the world that we weren't working on it anymore to make that happen. Interactive documentary doesn't have a tradition of open source. I've heard some folks talk about open standards like using HTML5 or WebVR, but that's distinct from specific legal licenses that let other people use the code you make. And it's also very cultural. It's about building your work in the open on platforms like GitHub that enable communities to be so invested in it that they will refuse to let it die, and motivated by their own self-interest will change it enough that it can live beyond your funding or your interest or your will. And lastly, you need to let go of the what-ifs. What if someone does something with this work I wouldn't do, or makes $1 million, or doesn't like me? You need to let go of all that. For me, it's the idea and the spirit of the work that you want to preserve, not the thing as it last existed when you pressed the publish button. Thank you.